What if I told you that more money is stolen from workers by their employers every single year than is stolen in every robbery, every burglary, and every car theft combined? Not slightly more, 3 times more. Research has it that wage theft costs American workers $50 billion annually. The FBI tracks property crime obsessively. Annual reports, congressional hearings, dedicated task forces. Wage theft gets a fraction of that attention, a fraction of that enforcement, and a fraction of that outrage. The person most statistically likely to steal from you is not a stranger on the street. It is the person who signed your employment contract. One shocking truth is that most people who experience it never know it happened. That is not an accident. That is the design. Check your next pay slip, not the total, the hours. Check whether your overtime was paid. Check whether you were compensated for the late shift, the early start, the break you worked through because things got busy. In a study of low-wage workers across 3 major American cities, 68% reported at least one pay violation in the week before the survey. On average, they lost 15% of their income to wage theft, equivalent to 3/4 of a year's grocery bill. 15%. Gone. Not through misfortune, but through a deliberate decision made by someone with more power in the employment relationship than the person they employed. This happens in layers. Unpaid overtime, hours that somehow never make it to the timesheet. Minimum wage violations. 4.3 million workers paid below the legal floor every year in the United States alone. Off-the-clock work, arriving early, staying late, answering messages after hours, none of it registering as paid time. Tip theft, particularly devastating in hospitality, where workers in the United States lose an average of $4,000 annually to employers pocketing or redistributing tips that legally belong to the person who earned them. And then there is the mechanism that has industrialized wage theft at global scale, misclassification. An employee is entitled to minimum wage, overtime, sick leave, and workers' compensation. An independent contractor is entitled to none of those things. The legal distinction is supposed to reflect reality. Who controls the work, whether it is permanent, whether the worker has other clients. What has happened instead is that corporations across every industry have reclassified millions of workers as independent contractors, not because the nature of their work changed, but because removing the employee label removes the legal obligation to pay them properly. In New York State alone, a study found that over 700,000 workers, more than 10% of the state's private sector workforce, were misclassified each year. Globally, the gig economy has turned this into a business model. By classifying workers as contractors, companies avoid compliance with minimum wage laws, overtime pay, and contributions to social insurance. Workers must provide their own vehicles, fuel, and equipment. In some U.S. markets, gig workers surveyed earned nearly 30% below the federal minimum wage. In 2020, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, and Amazon spent over $200 million on a single California ballot campaign to exempt themselves from a state law that would have required them to treat drivers and delivery workers as employees. $200 million to preserve the right to underpay millions of people. The return on that investment has been enormous. The workers are still contractors. This is not a uniquely American story. The architecture is identical everywhere. Only the names change. In the Gulf states, the Kafala sponsorship system ties a migrant worker's legal status directly to their employer. Workers from Southeast Asia and Southeast Asia continue to face withheld wages, unsafe housing, and restricted mobility. Enforcement remains the critical failure point of reform. A worker who reports wage theft risks losing his visa. A worker who leaves an abusive employer risks deportation. The system is designed to make silence the rational choice. In the garment factories of Bangladesh and Cambodia, wages are withheld, falsified, or simply not paid for hours that were worked. The brands whose labels appear on the finished clothing maintain just enough legal distance from the actual employment relationship to avoid liability while benefiting entirely from the underpayment. The supply chain is the mechanism of extraction. The consumer never sees it. In Nigeria, Ghana, and across West Africa, domestic workers, overwhelmingly women, work in the informal economy with no written contracts, no minimum wage protection, and no recourse when pay disappears. The International Labor Organization estimates that more than 60% of workers globally are employed informally. For most of them, wage theft is not an exception, it is the condition.
Now watch what happens when you try to recover what was taken. The failure to enforce wage laws creates severe economic insecurity for workers and encourages dishonest employers to continue their illegal practices, in effect subsidizing abusive business models at the expense of honest, law-abiding employers. In the United States, the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division investigates a fraction of violations, recovers a fraction of what it finds, and almost never penalizes repeat offenders meaningfully. Employers found guilty typically pay back less than they stole, face no criminal liability, and remain in business. The incentive to steal is structural. The incentive to stop is not. The contrast with countries that have chosen enforcement is stark. On January 1, 2025, Australia made intentional wage theft a federal criminal offense. Employers who deliberately underpay workers now face up to 10 years imprisonment and fines of up to 8.25 million Australian dollars, comparable to penalties for fraud. In the 15 months since the law came into effect, the Fair Work Ombudsman has opened criminal investigations, though enforcement remains a challenge where workers are reluctant to come forward. The law is new, the culture is shifting. The United Kingdom operates a government-run naming and shaming scheme for employers who fail to pay the minimum wage. Germany enforces its statutory minimum wage through the Federal Customs Office, with criminal liability attached to serious violations. The pattern everywhere is identical. Strong enforcement produces compliance. Weak enforcement produces theft. The choice between them is political, not inevitable. Zara is on the bus home from a late shift. She opens her payslip on her phone the way she checks a receipt, not expecting a problem, but knowing that not checking is how problems become permanent. She notices that something is wrong. She worked late 3 times this month. The payslip does not reflect it. She opens her calculator, does the math once, does it again. The amount missing is not catastrophic. It is the kind of number that disappears into the gap between what you think you earned and what arrives in your account. The gap most people assume is a rounding error they do not understand. Zara does not assume that. She screenshots the payslip, opens her Notes app, and writes down the dates, the hours, the difference. 3 weeks later, she files a wage claim with her state labor department. Free to file, no lawyer required, her employer cannot legally retaliate against her for doing it. The form takes 20 minutes. She does not know if it will go anywhere. She files it anyway because not filing guarantees nothing. That same evening, she searches something she has been thinking about since this channel explained the credit card trap. She checks for credit unions near her, finds 1-2 bus stops from work. No monthly fee. Credit card rate capped well below her current bank. She qualifies. The following Saturday morning, she takes her daughter with her. They walk in together. 40 minutes later, she has opened 2 accounts and updated her direct deposit. The $15 monthly fee she has been paying for 6 years stops that week. $180 a year back in her pocket. Not a transformation, but a direction. If you believe your employer has stolen wages from you, unpaid overtime, minimum wage violations, off-the-clock work, tip theft, or misclassification, you can file a complaint at dol.gov in the United States. In Australia, at fairwork.gov.au or by calling 131394. In the United Kingdom, at gov.uk/pay and work rights. No lawyer required, free to file. Retaliation against you for filing is itself illegal. To find a credit union you qualify to join, mycreditunion.gov lists options by location, employer, and community. Most people qualify for at least one. The switch takes one visit and about 40 minutes. Zara filed her claim. She moved her account. She does not know yet what comes back from the claim. She knows the fee stopped. The machine is still running, but she is no longer inside the same part of it she was in last month. That is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a different one. If this episode named something you have been living without a name for, share it. Not for the channel, for the person in your life who is on the same treadmill and does not know they can step off. New episode every week. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Broke by design. The system does not explain itself. We do.